Alex, one of the tools that I know the Rochester Housing Authority brings to bear in addressing needs for affordable and supportive housing is the Shelter Plus Care program. And I think you've tried to come up with some innovative ways of working with that program to serve needs in Rochester. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Again, based on my experience prior to the Housing Authority with working organizations, actually we're getting our audit done next week, so wish me luck on that. I know. Not bad, yeah. But again, it hasn't been without its challenges, as we have, I think it's about 15 community partners involved with us in the program. And all I can say is I wish I would have had the audit last week so I could tell you how it's going. But I mean, we feel pretty confident. I think the program has worked very well. We have had some challenges also with the funding, different priorities in the community. But again, fortunately for a community our size to be on the table has been the most important aspect of all of it.
And could you tell us more about how you work with the providers? Like, what role does the Housing Authority play versus what do the providers do? And how does that all come together?
Actually, we're very involved with the continuum of care, and what we do is just administer the vouchers, and we basically work with the providers to provide the full service. So we are somewhat hands-off, just as long as we do quality compliance to make sure that we're meeting the requirements that need to be met. But early on, we have such a strong nonprofit community in Rochester that it has always been part of the understanding and agreement that the organization providing the service will provide the service as they see. Okay.
JoAnne, back to you, and we'd like to hear some more about the Castle and Castle Gardens. You are mixing affordable housing for low-income families with supportive housing. How do the investors respond to that model? And especially since many of the supportive housing tenants may have had serious convictions in their past, and has that mix worked out for you with the population in the building?
It's actually a kind of funny story. What we started doing housing to meet was a need that we just weren't being seen. Let me say that in English. We weren't seeing anything available for people who had violent convictions way in their past, who were doing very well, who posed some of the lowest risks of recidivism of anybody out there. And especially people who had done a huge amount of time and were coming out as seniors. And I think this recidivism rate for that population is somewhere in the 1% level, but we couldn't get them housing. So our housing has never discriminated based on charge. We use evidence-based practices. We do real assessments of what risk the person actually poses. When our investors came to us for Castle Gardens, which was a $43 million project, they said, of course, you're not taking anybody with violent convictions. And I said, let's not talk about this until you've had a tour. And we had one of our seniors, who's very courtly and old world gentlemanly, walk them around. And I said, he is not only somebody we want in the building, but he'll be one of our anchor tenants because he'll help keep the building stable. And he does have a homicide conviction. And they kind of looked at me. And well, anyway, we have a mixed building, and the safest people in the building are the people who statistically have the lowest recidivism rate, which is largely driven by age. And we deliberately and affirmatively place them in the apartments with line of sight because they are going to age in place in this building, and they have a massive stake in the building working well. So what's interesting is how our investors have turned. And one of the investors had a friend who was a student at Harvard Business School, and he asked his classmates, would you invest in such a project? And to a person, they said no. And the reason they said no is they said nobody from the affordable community would want to move into a building with formerly incarcerated people. And I said, we're going to be beating them off with a stick. And we had 2,000 applications for our 50 apartments. And the building's 2 years old. It's way out of startup. It's going really, really well. And our investors no longer are worried about our people with violent convictions.
That's great. I always thought the people at Harvard Business School had something to learn from you. Shola, a few weeks ago, after a lot of work by a lot of people in the administration, the mayor announced his housing plan. And, I wonder if you could talk a bit about NYCHA's role in that housing plan, and, specifically, what do you think are going to be some of the either policy changes or programmatic things that NYCHA is going to be doing? And one thing I mentioned earlier, but I think we didn't get a chance to discuss, is the change in policy on homeless preference and the parts of the plan that are particularly geared toward addressing homelessness.
Sure. So the mayor's housing plan, a truly ambitious effort is I think an embodiment of the way that this administration is working differently, in the fact that we were all around the table, our respective teams working together. Did you want that? Sorry. And really a real framework for how we will set about creating 200,000 units of housing. NYCHA's role in the plan was clearly, we were at the table. Part of the conversation has been, meeting the needs of our population as well. As I mentioned, more than a third of our population is over the age of 62. NYCHA actually has about 10,000 units of senior-only units as well. And then within our broader portfolio are seniors who are mixed in with family development. So we have and some of you may have heard, we have some challenges with folks who are in oversized or units that are where they moved 50 years ago and raised their families, and now they are in very large units. And so how do we balance, the needs of the population, the folks who are on our waiting list, oftentimes families who are either currently not in our housing or are doubled up in really unsustainable living conditions with that. And so as part of the housing plan, one of the things that we're really interested in is replicating senior housing with services, and we have some of those models already. And so as part of the housing plan, you may have read, the mayor charged us with creating a NYCHA preservation and development plan, and the core principles of that plan are the following. One is that it starts with our residents, and I think unlike previous attempts in conversations where something was done and given to the residents, we really are starting from scratch and beginning a conversation with our residents in several key areas around the city to really understand and begin to hear from folks about their needs and their expectations about the future of NYCHA, and what does it mean for NYCHA to fundamentally look different, operate differently, and be financed differently. And so that's a process that we are beginning this summer, and really will serve as my new favorite term is found pilots for really what is truly a Marshall Plan for the New York City Housing Authority. And so we are beginning to lay out the core components of that, and clearly senior housing is a piece of that. But the objectives of this are, one, preserving New York City public housing, two, reconnecting our housing to the neighborhoods where we exist, really addressing these super blocks in ways that really are, addressing all of sort of the defensible space, all you planners out there, and really, really taking a fresh look at that. The third is leveraging existing public investment that's happening in and around our communities. So a great example is the work that we're doing in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. We were pleased to be selected as a Choice Neighborhood awardee a year or so ago, and we're working with a number of different groups, but also with a number of different city agencies to really create a comprehensive plan. So this isn't about a building. This is about, the 18 buildings of NYCHA that are there, that are in various states of significant disrepair. How do we address those? How do we rehab those buildings in ways that are sustainable, that are both from an energy perspective and also financially, and then reconnect those buildings to the surrounding neighborhood? What's the open space strategy? What's the commercial strategy? What's the potential, the future educational and health needs for that community? So that's a process that we're already involved in, and I think it's a really great example of the way in which we expect to work across the city to develop this plan that is specific to NYCHA.
Okay, great.